Well, good morning. No offense to the rest of y'all, but I wanted to say a special good morning to Carolyn, who's back after not being around for a little bit. Nice to see you. I was just struck as we were singing and being together about how our lives can be crazy busy, and I'm just so thankful that we get to spend an hour together on Sunday mornings doing something that kind of transcends all of the craziness of our lives and world and busyness, and to do that together with y'all. So I'm just really appreciative. And I guess in a way, what I think about this 100% series, what I'm thinking about is something like whatever we get to experience in worshiping God on a Sunday morning here together, we're just trying to do more of that kind of thing outside of just the hour that we're together on Sundays. And so today, with that in mind, I want to talk about God and friendship. God and friendship. And so I want to tell you about this thing called the American Perspective Survey. So the American Perspective Survey, which was done in both 1990 and then again in 2021 to calculate basically how many close friends American people had on average. And so we'll start with the data from 1990. It's 31 years ago. 40% of men 1990 said they had 10 or more close friends, 40% of guys. Conversely, 3% of guys back then said they had no close friends. And what about the women? In 1990, 28% of women said they had 10 or more what they considered close friends, and 0% said they had no close friends. This is back in 1990. Now, in the time between then and 31 years later, till 2021, I would argue that a good many things have changed, right, that have influenced people and friendship. And so, for example, it's pretty obvious that folks are more mobile. So, in other words, people are moving to different areas, thus kind of making it a challenge to keep friends over the long haul. I'm guessing, have heard of this phenomenon called the internet. I'm guessing most people here are familiar with that, and smartphones and social media and all that stuff. I've talked about that in the past. I think everybody would agree, maybe the older folks would say, things are just busier now, right? There's more opportunity to do more stuff, and we're just busy. The data says that in America, there are less Christians now than that there were, 31 years ago. And I would argue that folks generally have what I'm going to call commitment issues, and that influences things like friendships. And so I'm guessing all of that stuff, plus even more, goes into the data that has changed from 1990 to 2021. So let me give you the numbers currently. Let's go ladies first. Only 11% of women say in 2021 that they have 10 or more close friends. That was 28% originally. And now 10% of women, so up 1 out of 10, up from 0%, say they have no close friends. I don't know how this hits you, where you find yourself in this, but this is the data from this survey. The men's change, and this doesn't really surprise me, but the men's change is even more drastic. And so for men, it says now that only 15% have 10 or more close friends, and that was 40% previously. And no close friends has gone from 3% of men to 15% of men say they have no close friends. I got those statistics through an email that I get about 3 or 4 months ago. And I've been pondering in my head what this looks like, or is this the reality of the people that I experience, or even is this my own reality? Like, how many people would I consider as close friends? And so along with this data, I've been doing a little bit of my own experimentation, I guess, it goes this way. When I meet with folks to do counseling, or when I'm just talking to people about how they're doing, I quite often will ask this question. Maybe you've heard me ask this question. Who else are you talking to about this? Right? So someone comes in, they're having a difficult relationship or something difficult. I say, who else are you communicating to about this situation? And folks, almost without exception, everybody has said no one else. And you might say, well, Pastor Luke, it makes sense. They're going to come and talk to their pastor about these important, deep things. And so it makes sense that they're not sharing that. But I would say, what is a close friend if you can't talk to them about the most important, real things in your life? And so I'm very concerned about the lack of close friends that folks have. And that's why I think it's important to address that here today. Like I said, we're going to talk about God and friends. I'm a pastor, so I got to do 3 points because that's what pastors do. So I got 3 points for you today, and they are these. Number one, I'm going to talk about, Number one, I'm going to talk about God's plan for friends. Oh, it's right up there. God's plan for friends. Number two, how to be a bad friend. Now, that sounds weird, but we'll get there. And then third, a good friend. So here we go, and we're off. God's plan for friends. Now, hang with me here because I'm going to go a little bit theological on you. I hope you don't mind. Todd's excited. So, in Orthodox Christianity, in our church and in most Christian churches, we believe in this thing called the Trinity. And we might think, this is this weird aspect of God, that God is Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. That's just weird and odd. But it actually, I want to make that very practical today. And here's why. The Trinity says that God, eternal past to eternal future, has always been in relationship with each other, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And that those persons of God are always giving, receiving, and sharing love amongst each other. And what this means is that in a very real sense, God is in himself a community, right? God is friendship happening all the time perfectly. So when God created people that eventually became you and I, it wasn't that God was kind of bored and lonely and wanted to make these things so that he could have somebody to interact with because he was bored. It's not that. It's more so, just like in a marriage relationship where the husband and wife, out of their love for one another, create new life, right? Like new life comes out of that. Creation of humans is kind of that same thing, that God was happily in relationship with himself, and out of that abundance, out of the overflow of that, people get created. Here's what this means. It means that if we're created in the image of God, that we're created fundamentally to need relationship, that we need to have close friends, right? It's like we need food, water, shelter, and if you're a human being, you also need close friends, right? The most drastic thing you can do to people, and you can talk to folks prison-related to that kind of thing, is put someone in isolation because it's going to drive them crazy. And so we need close friends. Now, I already can guess on an objection that many of you are thinking in your heads right now about this, which is goes something along these lines. Well, Pastor Luke, you're a pastor and you're talking to all these people, so maybe you need close friends, but I'm just as happy to be out in my cabin or out in the woods or in my room reading a book because people, they just let me down, and I'd rather be by myself because I'm an introvert. Okay, well, here's what I'd like to do today. As always, I want to push back against everybody. And so for introverts, what I want to say is that you need close friends. You need close friends. However, I want to push back even harder on extroverts. Because what often happens in my experience is that those people who are people kind of folks, right? They're the life of the party. They're interacting with everybody. They have acquaintances and they have friends. And if you look at their Facebook thing, it might say 1,473 friends. But they need close friends. They need close friends. And so for all of us here, whether you're the kind of person, and my guess is introverts are a little better at the close part and worse at the friends, and extroverts are good with friends, but not so good at close. So I'm pushing back on everybody here today. All right, so God's desire is that we have friends. We're made for friendships because we're made to be like him. And for introverts and extroverts, we all need some close friends. Now, I thought about describing to you next how to be a good friend, but I thought you probably have heard sermons like that in the past, so let's go at this from a different angle. What I want to do next is talk to you about if you want some steps to be a bad friend, this is what you do. Now, my hope is obviously that you don't follow these steps, but you get the point, I think. So what I'd like to do is I'm going to go through three different proverbs, and see how each of these proverbs describes 3 easy steps. If you want to be like the worst friend in the world, this is what you do, okay? All right, the first one is this. Proverbs 27, verse 6 says this. Faithful are the wounds of a friend, profuse are the kisses of an enemy. Faithful are the wounds of a friend, profuse are the kisses of an enemy. So if you want to be a bad friend, here's what you do. Give kisses only. If you want to be a bad friend, give kisses only. Now, as I was practicing this morning with my daughter Audrey, she said, wait a second. I don't know anybody that's kissing their friend. So she's 8, so she didn't quite get this. But obviously, this passage is talking about the idea of kind of complimenting or speaking positively to your friend versus wounding them for their own good. And what I'm arguing for here right now is that if you want to be a bad friend, all you do is speak whatever you know that person wants to hear. You never push back on them. You never criticize them. You never confront them with anything that they don't want to hear. And it's interesting to me that I think, and I could be wrong in this, but I think our society right about now has created a whole bunch of folks that are fragile and who are superficial precisely because we have a whole lot of kisses going on and not nearly enough wounds. And interestingly, if there are wounds, we almost always place them in the social media space where we can wound from a distance and not face-to-face with somebody. And so what I want to say to you now is this. A good friend wounds somebody. Now, please don't hear me and go home today and find somebody that you're mad at something and tell them they're an idiot and go off of them for 30 minutes. That's not what I'm saying, right? You can wound someone graciously, but here's why wounding our friends is so important. Because if you're not willing to risk the relationship, if you're not willing to put the relationship on the line for that person's good, then you're not actually a good friend. If you're not willing, thanks, Keith. If you're not willing to risk the relationship, then you are not a good friend, folks. And I find this in myself. I'm a people pleaser. I've said that before, and I'll say it again. It's a very big struggle for me to say what needs to be said versus what I know that person wants to hear. Okay. Number 2, second step if you want to be a terrible friend is this. Don't commit to someone. Don't commit to someone. This comes from Proverbs 18, verse 24, which says, a man of many companions may come to ruin, but there is a friend who sticks closer than a brother. Many companions may come to ruin, but there's a friend who sticks closer than a brother. Now, I think that it would come to no surprise if I stand up here today and say, I think, generally speaking, we just heard about Gene and Shirley's 70th anniversary. Generally speaking, there's less commitment among marriages. I think everyone would not be all that surprised by that idea. However, I want to point out today that I think there's also less commitment amongst friendships. In other words, I think the issues around marriages are a symptom of a less committed society. And so if you want to be a terrible friend, what you can do is this. If someone asks you to help watch their kids, help them cut firewood, whatever job they might need done, and this person's a friend of yours, here's what you do. You say, I think I can possibly, let me check my schedule and I'll get back to you. And then you wait to make sure nothing better comes along because although, that's okay and they're your friend, you might rather go out to eat with somebody or do something else that's more enjoyable than necessarily serving your friend. And so you wait and wait and wait, and then at the last minute when they say, hey, by the way, what about, helping me out? You beg off and say, I'm not feeling that good today, or I'm not, and you don't commit to that person for their good. That's a good path to being a terrible friend. And my gut feel, I could be wrong about this, but I think there's a generation above me that has exemplified commitment to some level, and I think my generation and younger, we are just stinking at this. I think we're doing very poor. Here's another way to be uncommitted, is ghosting someone. I don't know if you all are familiar with this terminology, but ghosting someone is basically the idea that when someone texts you or they email you or something, instead of responding back, you just, radio silence. You just don't get back to them. And this is a phenomenon that I've seen become more and more commonplace. And then, oh, sorry, I'm sorry. And then there's like an excuse, right? Don't commit. That's a good way to be not a good friend. I was personally really convicted about this idea of commitment. Here's why. I have a lot of chance to interact with people when they're going through, difficult times, difficult seasons, whatever. And I read this quote that said that a companion, right? Like, so let's say your friend, somebody you know, suffers some tragedy, some difficult time, and we have some of them right here, and I can visualize these people that have gone through something real difficult. What a companion does is a companion says to that person, call me if you need something, right? Like, I'll be here, let me know if you need something. A friend says, they hang up the phone, I'll be right over, right? Like, I'm coming. Like, I don't know what's happening there, but I'll be there, and I'll bring some soup or whatever, and I'm here for you because you're my friend. And that was real convicting to me, because I tend towards the, hey, reach out to me if you need something otherwise because I'm busy and I have 3 kids or whatever. A friend says, I'll be right there. All right, the third way to be a terrible friend. So step 3. This is Proverbs 25, verse 20. Third way to be a terrible friend is this. Whoever sings songs to a heavy heart is like one who takes off a garment on a cold day and like vinegar on soda. I better read that one more time. Whoever sings songs to a heavy heart is like one who takes off a garment on a cold day and like vinegar on soda. What on earth is this talking about? Here's what it's saying. If your friend is miserable for whatever reason, and you're able to sing happy songs of joy while they're over there suffering, then you are not a good friend. In other words, if the tragedy that afflicts their life doesn't also affect you emotionally, then you're not a good friend. Or conversely, and this happens too, some great thing happened to my friend, and I can't rejoice with them. I can't be genuinely happy for them. They got a promotion at work or whatever happened, right? That's a way to be a terrible friend, to not be. And this is why we can only have so many good friends, right? You can't have an infinite level of intimate, close friends because we can't make ourselves emotionally vulnerable to like 100 different people. That's not going to work. But those few people that you have as your intimate, close friends, if they're suffering, you're suffering. If they're happy, you're happy. That's the way to be a good friend. So how do we go forward? Right? Like, what do we do? And a lot of folks would say something like, Pastor Luke, that all sounds good and well to have that kind of intimate, deep, close friendships. But I've tried and I've looked out here at people, and there really aren't a lot of good options available. Like, I just can't find anybody that's going to be that kind of person for me in my place, right? Like, I know some people or whatever, but there's nobody available to be that kind of intimate, close friendship. And I would say that I don't really think that's the problem. I think most often the problem is that we know that that kind of intimate friendship is going to require more of us than what we actually want to give. That's going to be a bigger challenge than what we know we'll be able to actually support. Like, we're going to have to be that level of commitment. We're going to have to, and this is the weird thing, we might have to wound our friend, then they feel bad, and then we have to be bad and sad with them, right? Like, it's all mixed together. And so I think that we know ourselves too well that we actually avoid that kind of intimate, close friendship and instead turn to YouTube or, busying ourselves with our yard work or whatever instead of having that intimate, close friendship. And so I'm guessing, since we're here in church on Sunday morning for an hour together to worship Jesus, that you knew that this was probably going to come, but let's get to Jesus. Or in other words, how does a Christian relationship with Jesus change the dynamic of friendship? How should we look How should the stats look different for Christians than they should for non-Christians? Well, here's how. On the night that Jesus was betrayed, he was in the upper room celebrating the Passover meal with his 12 closest friends, which puts him clearly in the category of 10 or more close friends, right? And he's celebrating this meal with them, and he knows that he's about to go to his death the very next day. And if you read through kind of the whole upper room discourse at the end of the book of John, you get this sense that there's Jesus, and he's sharing the vulnerable, intimate part of his heart and life's work with these 12 guys. And he says this to them. This is what Jesus says in the upper room. This is from John 15 now. He says, "This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you." And another way to think about that passage is, I'm going to command you folks to be friends with each other in the same kind of way that I've been a friend to you. Right? Like, I've exemplified friendship to y'all. Now you go and do that with each other. And then he goes on and he says, "Greater love has no one than this, that someone lay down his life for his friends." Greater love has no one than this, that someone lay down his life for his friends. Now, quite often, I think that when we think of the idea of friends, we mostly frame that conversation, at least in our brains, or at least in my brain, as what are my friends? What can they do for me? Like, how can they help me? How can they make my life better? How can they be committed to me? How can they maybe even wound me helpfully? How can they, right? Jesus says the best way, the best picture of healthy friendship is to lay down your life for your friends. And then, and this is why Jesus is awesome, because he speaks the truth in words, and then he backs it up with actions. Then the very next day, here's what Jesus did. He went to the cross, and he died. And in the cross, on the cross, he proclaimed truth. In other words, he gave wounds to the sinful world by exposing its sinfulness. He literally showed the ultimate commitment, right? Like, he didn't ghost anybody. This is Jesus on the cross, who could have had legions of angels there to take him down, and he said, "No, I'm committed to you, so I'm going to stay here for your good." Was he emotionally connected to us? Right? Like, this is the Christian story is the only religion where instead of the God being apart and we're suffering and we're trying to kind of find our way up to him, he's going to put on flesh and come down, and he's going to suffer. He's like, "Oh, y'all are suffering? I'll be right there." He shows up and he suffers right alongside. And so here's what this means for us, I think. I think it means that if you're here today and you're a Christian, what you have access to is the best possible friend in the history of the world. Right? Like, you have access to the best possible friend in the history of the world. And that's awkward, because for us, it feels weird to be on the, we want to place ourselves, at least in our minds or my mind, I want to place myself as the good friend, and those people who are ghosted, or those people who aren't committed, those people, right, they're the bad friends. But that's not how it works with Christians. We say very confidently that we have the awkward position of being Jesus' friends, because that's what he calls us. He literally says, "You used to be my servants, now I'm going to call you friend." But it doesn't end there, because the way Jesus works is, if he says he's willing to be our friends, he then gives us this ability to wrap ourselves up in this mission, just like he told his disciples, right? He said to them, "As I have loved you, so love each other." And so I'm saying to us here today at Kish, here or listening online or whatever, that as Jesus is our best friend, we're called to be friends with each other. And I've said this before, and I'll say it again, I'm very confident that the future of Kish does not hinge on me, and what happens here from 10 to 11 on a Sunday morning. It hinges on us getting interconnected in healthy friendships. And here's precisely how or why. That data that you can see right up here behind me, like our world, and you can see this, all you have to do is look around and see people going crazy, people being anxious, people stressed about all this stuff, and some of us are here feeling the same way. I get that, right? We're here and we're feeling the same way that the people in the world are feeling, but we have access to the best possible friend, and they don't. And so I can't imagine, I thought quite a while about this. I can't imagine a way. We oftentimes say, hey, we're a church, we want to reach out to the unsaved. We want to reach out to people, right? And sometimes we get in our mind that has to be some fancy program or that has to be something, and we'll do some of that. But there's like 200 or so people connected here at Kish. And what does it look like for those of us who have a relationship with the best possible friend to say, because Jesus loves me and he's a great friend to me, I'm now going to go out and I'm going to risk relationship with my other friends. It's fascinating to me that Jesus, that night at the upper room, Judas bailed out on that to go betray, right? Like Jesus, he was one of the 12 best friends. He bailed out on that to go sell Jesus' location for 30 pieces of silver. The other disciples couldn't stay awake in the Garden of Gethsemane. Like people, I guarantee your friends are going to fail you. That's a for sure. We all know that. The question is, do we as Christians have the resources of the availability of the best friend ever to then go out and put ourselves out there to be friends to these people anyhow? That's really the question. All right, let me close with some applications. Number one, be intentional. I find it fascinating. A lot of people say, if you want a healthy marriage, what you need to do is you need to put effort into your marriage. I don't think I've ever heard someone say, if you want good friendships, you have to put effort into your friendships. They just come and go, and we take them as they come or something like that. But literally, what does it look like to put effort into your friendships? I'll give you one idea that I think helps. I think it's 5 words. I tried to count this morning. 5 words. If you have somebody that's your friend or your acquaintance and you want to intentionally care for them, you say, how are you really doing? How are you really doing? And putting the word really in there matters. And I had 2 people that are sitting here right now, and they know who they are, that said that to me this week. And it's soul-filling to know that somebody cares how I'm really doing. We need to be doing that for others. Number 2, speak the truth. Is there somebody in your life that might need a gracious, loving, compassionate wound? I think what happens sometimes is we have a relationship with somebody to a certain level, and then we don't want to say the truth to them because something about them bothers us, but we're afraid to say the truth to them, so we just avoid them and we just distance ourselves relationally. So maybe there's somebody that needs to have a wound for their good, right? You're not yelling at them, you're not saying you're an idiot, you're saying, I love you, and I think that we need to talk about this. Number 3, pay attention to your level of commitment. I know for me, that means be wary, and I'm not saying that I won't say, call me if you need something, but are there times where you need to say, hey, I'll put everything down, I'll be right over. Number 4, develop your friendship with Jesus. Develop your friendship with Jesus. You see, the secret weapon that we as Christians have in this situation of friendship is that we have someone who is not going to let us down. He's going to be faithfully there. He wants your good. He's going to give you a wound so graciously and helpfully that he cares so much about your good. And if he's going to do that for us, then we need to develop that relationship, because if the world is going to need help, I'm pretty convinced that the political parties aren't going to solve those issues. And I feel like that's going to be on us. And if we're not connecting with Jesus, then how do we have the resources to do that? We're just going to end up like everybody else, friendless. Number 5, this is kind of awkward, but oh well. Come to communion. Come to communion. Here's why. So the Grace Brethren tradition, we celebrate 3 things at communion. We celebrate a meal, which is not all that awkward because you sit and eat and talk to people, and that's cool. And then the second step is we do foot washing. And my experience is that a whole bunch of people say, I don't want to do foot washing. That's awkward and weird to wash somebody else, especially guys, wash someone else's feet. They might have like pink toenails that I didn't know about or something like this. But it's meant to be awkward, and it's meant to be awkward because it's a chance to have a more intimate relationship with each other. I'll end with this. I think a lot of folks believe, and this goes with the 100% series, it's like I have my relationship with God over here, and then maybe over here I like do or don't have a lot of friends, and those two things are completely disconnected. But I would argue that I think that's exactly wrong. I think the kinds of folks who can be open and vulnerable in our relationship with God and this sort of thing, who have our identity strong and secure because we know who died on the cross for us, are the exact kind of people who can put themselves out there over and over again to be friends with all sorts of people. And yes, that's going to be, right, like Jesus, it's going to mean that people are going to fail us, absolutely. But the alternative is that we say we're a Christian that has faith, and then we isolate our friendships as different than that, and then we end up alone and anxious and depressed and all this kind of stuff anyhow. As I've said other times in this series, my hope is that Kish is the kind of place where we have folks who are receiving love and relationship with God so that as compared, we can be like a counterculture to what's happening outside in the quote-unquote real world where lots of people are struggling, and we can bring some kind of glimpse of hope and strength. And I think a big piece of that, it's like if there's 200 people here and we all did that with like 2 friends, there's 400 people that are affected because of our friendship. All right, let me pray. Heavenly Father, I come before you on behalf of our church, and I ask you to help us to have a realistic image of where we're at with our friends. And maybe there's some folks here who say, I have, blood brothers and blood sisters that I know that they would like go to bat for me. They're committed. They're awesome. And help them to realize how special and thankful they ought to be for that. But to take that and then expand it out to even more people. And I pray, Lord, for those here who are saying something like, that's right, I don't have anybody to talk to when things really go downhill. That you give us the courage that we can find in Jesus in our relationship with him to open ourselves up, to be vulnerable, to share, to talk about how we're really doing and not just say on Sunday morning with a smile, yeah, I'm good, how about you? And go on with our lives. And I pray mostly, Lord, for those folks who are out in the world who don't know you, who aren't connected to a church where they can have some level of relational connection, who are isolated, maybe it's because of COVID, maybe it's because of some other thing, who are just weary of life, anxious, depressed, all this kind of stuff. I pray, Lord, that you would empower us to recognize and seek out those friendships, completely knowing that it's highly likely that people will not fulfill their side of the deal. But I pray also, Lord, that you'd help us to be so interconnected here that everybody that's sitting here today would be able to say, I have a good friend at church, and because of that, I can make friends with people outside of church, even if they're going to be a pain to me in the process. I pray mostly, Lord, that you get the glory from all of this because you're worthy of worship, because you're the best friend. You're the most capable. You're the image of what it looks like to be an ideal person, and you're also God. And so we just worship you together today, and thank you for the opportunity to be here. In Jesus' name, amen.